All right, welcome to Spiral Dynamics Stage Yellow. If you hadn't seen the other parts of this multi-part series, make sure you go back and you watch Spiral Dynamics Stage Blue, Orange, and Green so that you have some context for some of the deep stuff we're going to be talking about today. I'm excited about this one because Stage Yellow is one that I'm really passionate about. If you resonate with Actualized.org content and you like the stuff that I talk about, chances are it's because you resonate with yellow. There's something special about yellow, something magical. Yellow is rare. It's rare to find yellow thinkers in our society. It's very rare to find them in the media, on TV, etc. Yellow tends to be a very deep stage. So the way that Spiral Dynamics works is, of course, let me just remind you the stages. First we have beige, purple, red, blue, then orange, then green, and finally yellow. Now, yellow is special because yellow is now called Tier 2. There are two tiers. The first tier is all the stuff underneath yellow, all the stuff we've talked about up to now. And that's sort of conventional thinking. That's how 99% of all of mankind thinks. So most of mankind doesn't know that there is such a thing as Tier 2. So what is Tier 2? Tier 2, Claire Graves described as a quantum leap in one's awareness of reality. It's an awakening to systems thinking and holism, seeing how everything within reality is deeply interconnected in ways that Tier 1 couldn't even imagine. Tier 2 is opening up to awareness of the spiral itself. Now, you don't have to know spiral dynamics to be in Tier 2, but it sure helps. And Tier 2 thinkers look back upon human development. They start to see these natural levels emerging, which is what Spiral Dynamics talks about. Tier 2 is a shift from survival into being. Have you noticed that most of mankind is not really interested in being? They are interested in survival. And of course, this notion of survival means a lot more than just keeping your ass alive. It means all the stuff that normally people do, which is have families and have children and go earn money and buy a house, buy a car and hang out with their friends and all the entertainment. All of that comes under the label of survival. That's what that is. That's not being. Being is something else, which we'll talk about. There's a shift in Tier 2 from needy perception into being perception. I have an older video that talks about this difference between these two different modes of perceiving. Being perception is looking at a thing for what it is, whereas needy perception is when you look at a thing as to how it can serve you. So literally your entire perceptual system is corrupted and distorted by your self-survival agenda. So if you're afraid of having violence done to you, getting abused, being manipulated, being exploited, being cheated, being left broke and unable to pay your bills, these are survival level fears and anxieties and concerns. If you get angry about this sort of stuff and you have trouble just basically managing your survival within life, then that colors how you're able to perceive the world. And basically, you're not able to perceive the world as it is. You perceive the world as it relates to you. So what you need is how you perceive the world. And it turns out the stuff that you don't need, you don't even see. You don't even realize it's there. You overlook it. That's how your ego distorts your entire perceptual system. So with Tier 2, you're moving beyond that. And finally, you can look at the world in what we might say is an objective manner. Tier 2 derives its values from the magnificence of existence itself rather than from selfish interests or group interests. With Tier 2, there's a much wider and deeper perspective of life. You are no longer just concerned about your own petty little problems or how to be successful in life, but you're concerned about the problems of mankind, and even beyond mankind, you're concerned with the problems of existence. Ideas become multidimensional in Tier 2. There's a lot of layer and complexity to things. there's now an awareness of one's own perspective. So you see that you're looking at the world from a perspective just like everybody else, and that every perspective is partial, including your own. So you no longer give yourself special excuses and justifications that everyone in Tier 1 was giving. See, the problem with Tier 1 fundamentally is that everyone is looking at the world from their perspective, and they think that that is the truth and that is reality. So whether you're blue or orange or green, that's basically how you look at the world. And then you believe that people who aren't looking at the world from that same perspective as you, that they're somehow deluded or wrong or crazy or insane or criminal or whatever other label you give to them. In Tier 2, you realize, no, that's an illusion. We all have a perspective. To be alive is to have a perspective, and there's really no stepping out of one's perspective. There's no such thing as objectivity per se. The way that Tier 2 develops objectivity is by realizing that there really isn't such a thing as objectivity. That religion you thought was the absolute truth is no longer the absolute, just one perspective. And that scientific model you thought was the absolute truth, that's also no longer the absolute truth in Tier 2. There's a lot more relativity and subjectivity, and perceptions and perspectives become the entire name of the game. In Tier 2, there's a falling away of judgment, criticism, blaming, and scapegoating, which is very common in Tier 1. Fundamentally, that's the biggest problem with Tier 1, because everyone has their own perspective, but they don't realize that it's just a perspective. They end up judging and criticizing and blaming and scapegoating everybody else. And then you have this giant food fight between all the different Tier 1 colors fighting over each other, trying to gain dominance. And Tier 2 is going meta and seeing that whole dynamic and noticing like, oh, I don't have to play that game. I can rise above that. At Tier 2, demonization becomes untenable. Nobody looks like a demon to you anymore. Evil ceases to exist, and it's recognized just to be a selfish illusion. Tier 2 is non-moralistic. In Tier 2, fear is replaced by curiosity and care. And Tier 2 is really what Abraham Maslow talked about as the self-actualizing individual. I have a fairly old episode called Self-Actualization, where I give you a long laundry list of characteristics that I took notes on from Abraham Maslow's work. And it's a really powerful list. And what I'm describing there, and what Maslow is describing, is the self-actualizing individual. And what is that? Well, you can go and look at that video, and it'll tell you all about that. You can also read Maslow's work and study that in depth. But if that concept of self-actualization, all those qualities of a self-actualizing individual, if that resonates with you, and it probably does, because that's what Actualized.org is about, then that's Tier 2. See, there's something different. There's something a little bit more elevated, more transcendent about the self-actualizing individual. He's not like your typical guy who's just worried about work and sex and money and these sorts of things. So that's what we're talking about. So now we're going to get into the juicy stuff of explaining yellow. Now, what I described just now, that wasn't yellow. I was describing Tier 2. So Tier 2 includes yellow, and it also includes turquoise, which we'll be covering next. That was a general description of the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2. So again, I want to give credit to Claire Graves, Don Beck, and Christopher Cohen for developing the bulk of this model, and many of the examples and information that I'm providing to you in these episodes come directly from them. So what is the essence of yellow then? Yellow we can call systemic, integrative, and multi-perspectival. Yellow takes many perspectives upon reality. That's one of its most defining characteristics. And I was thinking about this in preparing for this talk, and the image that came to mind for explaining this is, several images. One is it's the difference between looking at the world through a spyglass, the way that a pirate looks through the world, or through a telescope, That's looking at the world through one perspective, one lens. That's tier 1. Yellow is now looking at the world through the eye of an insect, one of those compound eyes, or through a camera that uses multiple lenses. There's a camera that came out recently a few years ago that has like 15 lenses in the camera. And each of these lenses is a different lens, it's positioned in a different place, and it's a different size, and it's a different aperture and different settings. And all of them, you take, this camera is a digital camera, of course, so it's going to interpolate, using some kind of digital process, it's going to interpolate all the different 15 or so lenses that are there, and it's going to produce one really high-resolution image. To me, that's the perfect metaphor for what yellow is doing. That's what multi-perspectival means. And also, you might be familiar with this phenomenon with telescopes. There are radio telescope arrays which use multiple dishes and combine the data from multiple dishes to create one image, and that actually gives you a larger area. It's as though you had a lens that was much larger than the sum of all the individual parts. So that's what yellow is really about. And you can tell when an individual is coming at the world from that kind of multi-perspectival approach, that's a different type of thinker than you normally see. Yellow, once again, shifts its pendulum from green, which was collective, back to individualistic. So every stage alternates. Orange was individualistic, blue was collective, green is collective, and now we're swinging back from green into individualistic. But it's a different kind of individualistic. Whereas orange was all about personal success, damn the costs, damn the collateral damage, damn the environmental damage, yellow is about expressing the self, but not at the cost of others. There is now a sensitivity and awareness to excessive self-interest, and yellow strives to limit that, and yellow is now aware of its own footprint, aware of its carbon footprint, aware of its footprint within relationships. Yellow is careful not to hurt people's emotions too much. That it learned from green. But also, green was a little bit too much of a bleeding heart, so yellow softens that and tempers it and brings it back down to a sort of a nice balance between orange and green, because orange was too excessively selfish and green was perhaps too excessively self-sacrificing. So yellow finds a nice balance between those two. Yellow is about understanding the magnificence of existence. So yellow is all about exploring reality using your mind. Every perspective is partially true to yellow. There's a kernel of truth to be found in what everybody thinks. Even if they think something crazy and immoral and wrong, you can still find a kernel of truth there. This, of course, makes yellow extremely open-minded. Yellow is able to consider all sorts of radical perspectives that normally stage blue or orange or green would just shut down and dismiss. Yellow is about designing integrated and open systems. Yellow is seeing life as a kaleidoscope of natural hierarchies, systems, and flows. Yellow people are the information elites, and they are caring yet at the same time realistic, not overly emotional like green. So that's the essence of yellow. When does yellow emerge? Yellow emerges from the limitations of green. Green becomes very communalistic, and green goes into the excesses of mob mentality, into the excesses of emotionality, and so yellow brings that back. Yellow comes when green develops increased discernment. So not all perspectives are equal. Some are better than others. And there's a recognition now, after you've done the whole green thing of breaking down hierarchies, now you start to realize, wait a minute, maybe there are such things as natural hierarchies. Sure, there are artificial ones that man has constructed, which are problematic and need to be broken down, and maybe they're inefficient or they're oppressive. But then there's also natural hierarchies. What about those? And then that moves you from green to yellow. Green ultimately becomes frustrated with fruitless activism. There's a frustration with criticizing and protesting and joining movements and sitting down and talking and sharing our feelings. Yeah, you can do that all day long. You can do that. But what does it get you? Does it actually solve the problems of mankind? You might find that it doesn't. And then that starts to get you to thinking like, well, what about the actual solutions? Let's actually come up with the actual solutions rather than just talking about it and sharing our feelings. And that moves you into yellow. At the tail end of green, you start to see the wreckage of the entire spiral. It starts to become apparent to you that every stage is fighting with itself and with other stages above it or below it. And so Tier 1 is basically contributing to the it's basically endangering and jeopardizing all of mankind. And so as you see this, you realize that you're not going to solve mankind's problems at Tier 1. You need to move to Tier 2. You need to figure out how to get all of these different perspectives to work together in a healthy manner, which then becomes the obsession of yellow. Ideas become more interesting to yellow than community, which is what green was interested in. Yellow becomes really interested in how the other side thinks, rather than just criticizing and judging. And yellow now has an awareness of its own perspective. So you could say that yellow emerges when green becomes self-aware of itself as a perspective, and green realizes, oh yeah, I'm just one out of many perspectives, and no perspective is complete. And even though green was about exploring different perspectives to a certain degree, green was multicultural, and green valued diversity, and green was a bit relativistic, still, yes, green was doing that, but it was still doing it from its own perspective. And if someone wasn't agreeing with green, then green would get pissy about it, get triggered about it, and try to exclude that one. Yellow now starts to see, oh, my own perspective is not special. Green held the position that green's perspective was somehow special and superior to all the other perspectives. Let me give you now a list of yellow values. You're going to resonate with all of these if you are in yellow. Yellow values nuance and complexity, open-mindedness, perspectives, of course, novel concepts and points of view. Yellow values generating fresh insights, understanding, systems thinking, nonlinear dynamics, sustainability, and long time horizons. Yellow values going meta. Yellow values big picture understanding versus technical analysis. So orange tends to be very technical with its science, whereas yellow still relies on science, but now it's a more holistic approach. And it's not so much about analysis, but it's also about synthesis, bringing things together. You're not just dissecting everything, you're bringing things together. You're connecting the dots, which yellow loves to do. Yellow is an expert, a master at connecting the dots between things that normally people would think were not related. Yellow values penetrating to the core of an issue, identifying and solving root problems. One of the problems with the lower stages, like orange and green, is that they didn't get to the root of the problems. Yes, green has a problem with excessive capitalism, and yes, orange has a problem with whatever. And usually, though, their solutions are short-term and they're surface level, which is why these problems keep recurring and nothing really gets solved. But yellow now cares about getting to the root. Yellow doesn't want surface-level solutions. Yellow values taking a multidisciplinary approach, which often means mixing perspectives from the hard sciences with the soft sciences, the physical sciences with the social sciences. There's not some clear-cut line between those two. And for yellow, a lot of the most interesting research is happening at those intersections between the hard and the soft sciences, in between different disciplines. Yellow values creativity and outside-of-the-box solutions. Now, orange would use the word thinking outside the box, but still, orange mostly thought inside the box. Because orange's box was usually like the corporate box. So in a corporate boardroom, you'll hear them talking about, let's think of it outside the box, guys, but still, they're thinking inside of the corporate box. Yellow now is truly able to think outside the box and find unique and creative solutions to problems. Yellow values ecology, responsible ways of being, studying models and modeling things. Yellow values spiral dynamics, because of course spiral dynamics is a model. One out of many. Yellow values natural hierarchies. Yellow values education, knowledge, research, and reading. And when it comes to reading and knowledge, yellow values diversity. So like really diverse perspectives, looking at how a problem might be solved by some indigenous culture in Australia or in Africa or whatever, that perspective. And then combining that with some hard-nosed scientific perspective from quantum mechanics or from chemistry or from some insight from mathematics. So it's merging all these things together. Yellow values clean content and concentrated information. Yellow is like an information absorber. Any piece of knowledge, any nugget of wisdom, yellow just absorbs it, puts it into his giant database, into his commonplace book. Yellow values lifelong learning, and yellow is proactive about learning. So yellow will teach himself. Yellow's not going to sit around and wait for somebody to explain something to him, and he's not just going to be learning in university when he's inside of a classroom. Yellow is learning all the time. It's a dedication to lifelong learning because there's so much to learn. Yellow knows that if he spends the rest of his life learning every single day, he's not going to learn even 1% of all there is to learn about reality. That's how complex reality is. Yellow values expertise, competence, and experience. Yellow values complexity. Yellow values context and learning from history. Yellow values developing skills to become an instrument for the greater whole. Yellow values independent thinking, neutrality, being objective and impartial, designing solutions for the entire spiral rather than just for one's own color, the way that Tier 1 does. Yellow values meeting people where they're at, building bridges, social engineering, ecological designs, reducing the suffering of living systems, pulling ideas from many different sources, combining different ideas, models, and theories. Yellow is left-brained, where green was sort of a shift to the right brain. Yellow is now a shift back to the left brain. Yellow values vision, purpose, and being a visionary. Oftentimes, yellow people are great visionaries. They can see all sorts of things far into the future. Yellow values requisite variety and mental flexibility. Yellow values self-actualization, paradox, uncertainty, responsibility, independence, and autonomy, and being a lone wolf. Because yellow is moving away from the sort of group hive mind that was characteristic of green. Now, let me warn you that it's easy to confuse yellow with orange. So let's help you to distinguish between why yellow is different from orange. These are actually two radically different stages or two different attitudes, really, of understanding life. First of all, yellow is beyond concerns for self-survival, like we talked about, whereas orange is wrapped up in them. Orange is often driven by personal success, the need for money and achievement and recognition and earning prizes and awards. Yellow doesn't care about these things anymore. Yellow is beyond that. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, Leo, you criticize Trump for being an orange and even red type of person, but what if he's really staged yellow? Because after all, Trump is great at manipulating systems, and you, Leo, you say, Yellow is all about systems thinking. So what if Trump is actually yellow, but he's pretending to be orange and he's pretending to be green to manipulate the system? That's yellow, right? No, that's not yellow. That's orange and red. Make sure that you don't confuse manipulation of systems with systems thinking. These are two totally different things. Red and orange is brilliant at manipulating systems. To manipulate a system, you don't need to understand how the system really works. All you need to care about is selfishly exploiting it for your own purposes and agenda, to put yourself at the center or at the top of the system. That's what orange and red is about. That's not what yellow is about. Systems thinking is not about how to manipulate the system to your advantage. Systems thinking is about understanding the system, seeing life and reality as a set of complex systems interacting with each other, and it's about caring about the health of the entire system. It has nothing to do with you. It's not about how you're related to the system. It's just about maintaining the system. You see, like if you're a park ranger or you're some ecologist that's looking at some ecosystem, you care about preserving the ecosystem. You don't care about exploiting the ecosystem for your own benefits to line your own pockets. So this is very different. Trump is the opposite of yellow. He's an anti-systems thinker. He doesn't think in terms of systems. He's impulsive and he doesn't study anything the way that a yellow systems thinker would. If you really want to understand systems thinking, then I recommend you check out my video, Intro to Systems Thinking, which is a long and juicy video that talks about all the intricacies of that. And also check out my book list. I have an entire category in my book list called Systems Thinking with several books that just talk about systems thinking. It's good to read those because then you'll understand what a yellow person thinks like. Yellow's attitude is non-manipulative. That's the key distinction between yellow and orange. Yellow cares about ecology and yellow cares about collateral damage, unlike orange. Yellow has a long time horizon and orange has a short time horizon. If an orange Wall Street broker or an orange CEO can manipulate next quarter's profits to be as high as possible, even though that's going to cost the company down the road, 10 years down the road, it's going to destroy the company's infrastructures. But hey, if it gets me higher profits this quarter, that's all that I care about because I'm only going to be CEO of this company for the next 3 years. And if I can just get a consecutive 12 quarters of constantly rising profits, I'm going to earn $100 million in stock options and everyone's going to love me. The boardroom is going to love me. And then I'm going to be out. And then what happens in 10 years with the company? Who cares? It's not my problem. That's how orange thinks. Yellow doesn't think like that. Yellow is also non-judgmental and neutral in a way that orange isn't. Yellow is aware of the entire spiral in a way that orange isn't. And yellow is aware of itself. Orange is not aware of itself. Yellow creates designs that accommodate for the entire spiral, whereas orange schemes and manipulates to put himself at the top of the spiral, at the top of a hierarchy, to gain maximum benefit and profit for himself. Even if it hurts the spiral, orange is not going to care, whereas yellow will care. And yellow will try to avoid actions that will hurt the entire spiral. So there you go. Now let me give you some more in-depth characteristics of yellow. Yellow is non-ideological and yet highly principled. Yellow acts from an interdirected core. Yellow has a strong ethical core, but this ethical core doesn't derive from some religion or some set of commandments or some book, but just his own inner wisdom and his own understanding of life that he has developed by assembling a big picture from many different perspectives. Yellow feels that understanding other worldviews is critical to navigating life. There's some kernel of truth in every worldview for yellow. And so sometimes yellow will study some obscure or arcane or otherwise distasteful worldview that normally a tier 1 individual wouldn't care about, because he's going to pick out that one diamond that's there and add it to his repository of understanding. For yellow, few ideas are sacred. All ideas are subject to revision and upgrade. So yellow is about being inside of an evolving universe and being a reflection of that. So if the universe and the world around you is evolving, if society is evolving, if culture is evolving, then our mind needs to be evolving all the time to reflect that. And so yellow becomes highly flexible, whereas the lower stages are more rigid. For yellow, the world is a complex, self-organizing, natural system that requires integral solutions. Yellow sees the complexity of life. Yellow appreciates just how complex social issues are. Political issues like poverty and healthcare and the economy, all of these are very complex, nuanced issues. There are no simple black and white answers to solve these. Which is why you require making lots of fine, nuanced distinctions, in yellow's opinion. And you require lots of knowledge, because you need to do lots of research on every single topic which you wish to somehow redesign so that it works better. Yellow introduces lots of ideas and connections and complexity. So if you bring a yellow person into your team, in your business or in your company or whatever, they're going to bring in all sorts of these complicated ideas. They're going to complicate your situation. Yellow has an overarching view of living systems. Yellow takes effective action to support the whole. Yellow integrates science, religion, and personal development. Yellow doesn't really care what others think about him. What others think about you is not critical, it's only interesting to yellow. To yellow, nothing is evil or purely negative. There's a higher wisdom to even the bad stuff in life that yellow will look out for. To yellow, every system has value, but that doesn't mean that every system is equal or every perspective is equal in the sort of sense of false equivalency, which was a problem for green. Certain perspectives are just downright wrong and very unhealthy, and yellow will recognize that. But even so, there might be some little kernel of truth there that he'll still pluck out. Lessons to be learned. From mankind's greatest atrocities, there are lessons to be learned. For yellow, everything is constantly evolving and changing. And yellow has given up clinging to tradition or the old status quo ways that we used to do things. Yellow believes in being adaptable, adapting to your environment. That's how you survive. Otherwise, you destroy yourself or you go extinct. Yellow sees deep common threads everywhere. Yellow is able to hold two contradictory perspectives at the same time, which most of the other stages are not able to do. That just doesn't compute for them. For yellow, it's not a problem. Yellow has a greater degree of behavioral freedom than other stages. Yellow is very adaptable. Yellow believes in flexibly flowing with changing conditions. Yellow sees a need to develop natural living environments that support human evolution. Yellow has an overarching vision about a system and then determines what the system needs to grow and to blossom. So if you think of systems as plants, then yellow is the gardener. And a system, what is a system? A system could be something like an education system, a university, or some ecosystem like a national park, or it could be some political party, it could be the government, it could be a religious organization. There's all sorts of these systems. Basically, every social institution is a system, and many natural biological things are systems as well. Yellow moves freely between different value systems. Yellow can kind of jump in and out. Yellow believes in acupunctural interventions, which means taking a small action to make a big impact. Yellow is all about finding those high leverage points. Yellow is aware of self-bias and self-deception in a way that the lower stages were not. Yellow looks beyond merely human-oriented interests. There are larger concerns there, global concerns, universal concerns. Yellow has a large vision about the future for humanity, and yellow can have a lot of revolutionary and visionary ideas. To actualize those ideas, yellow tends to have an enormous drive and focus. Yellow recognizes the importance of consciousness and spirituality, although yellow is not yet fully immersed in true spirituality. Yellow is still operating on the level of mind and intellect and analysis. So true spirituality will begin to flourish at the tail end of yellow and into turquoise. Yellow sees the limitations of reductionism, pragmatism, behaviorism, logical positivism, rationalism, materialism, and libertarianism. All of these sorts of isms, these rational scientific isms, which orange was really hot on because orange was developing these as an antidote to blue fundamentalist religion. Yellow sees that these isms of science and of secularism, that these isms are also limited, and they're also not completely true. Yellow is able to be curious without judging and keeps asking questions. For yellow, there's a constant flow of new ideas and ways of thinking. Yellow understands how everything is connected and works together. Yellow is good at distinguishing between the essential and the ancillary. And yellow is always keeping an eye on the big picture because that's what matters, not the technical minutia. Yellow loves learning and is a quick learner. Yellow is able to get in there, study, research a thing, and then learn how it works. Yellow is open to learning from any source. Yellow has an attitude of open questioning and discovery. For yellow, every experience is a learning opportunity. Yellow has strongly humanistic and inclusive values. Yellow enjoys paradox and uncertainty and is adept at resolving paradoxes. Yellow is really good at that. Yellow can enter the point of view of all the lower spiral stages. And yellow sees all the lower stages as legitimate. They have a right to exist. They serve some kind of function. So, of course, they don't need to be demonized. Yellow is able to facilitate the movement of people up and down the spiral. Yellow is able to dialogue with every stage of the spiral below it. And yellow is here to help build systems for tier 1 to evolve upward at its own pace. One of the biggest differences between green and yellow is that green tried to get everyone below it to jump up to green. So green might go to Africa or to the Middle East, to cultures where the majority of the people there are still at stage purple or red or early blue, and green tries to convert those people to becoming green hippies. And that's just not going to work for them because they still need to go through a full blue cycle, through a full orange cycle before they can get to green. Yellow is now aware of this problem. And so yellow is not going to try to get everybody up to yellow immediately, but to go through the right process to get there at their own pace. Yellow sees each system as the next step, but not the best or the final. Yellow is non-reactive. Yellow is able to listen deeply. Yellow recognizes layered dynamics. Yellow is able to entertain an idea without believing in it. Yellow has a knack for gathering information from diverse sources. Yellow is continuously changing its conceptual world that it lives in. Yellow prefers elegant simplicity and functionality versus opulence and displays of power or status. Red and orange and blue, to some extent, they like these sort of displays, ritualistic displays of power, of hierarchy. Yellow is beyond all this. Yellow has no need for status or exhibitionism. Yellow is not concerned with comparisons. Rather than comparing itself to others, yellow compares itself to itself, which is unlike orange. Because orange was all about besting the competition, being better than everybody else at the gym, that sort of mentality. Being the strongest, the buffest, the richest, the sexiest, whatever. Yellow cannot be coerced, bribed, or intimidated. Now, of course, this is a generalization here. This doesn't mean that all yellow people are completely immune to coercion or bribery or intimidation, but generally speaking, yellow is beyond that. Because to intimidate or to bribe somebody, that person has to be at a level of self-survival, right? Because that's where you have fears and that's where you have personal needs. Whereas when you transcend that into the being level, then you transcend the ability to be intimidated and coerced. Yellow doesn't get involved with criticism or controlling behavior. Yellow doesn't desire to control or to be controlled. Yellow doesn't create enemies and doesn't scapegoat. Yellow is immune to radicalization. You can't brainwash yellow because yellow thinks from so many different perspectives that you can't trap him into one paradigm or into one way of thinking. You can't trap him into a cult. Yellow is drawn to hot spots where the evolving crisis demands new insights. So what is that area? Maybe within politics, maybe within some discipline of science, maybe within some environmental movement. There's a hot spot where something new is happening. There's a crisis going on. People are bickering back and forth. They're not able to resolve the problem because they're looking at it from the wrong perspectives. That's where yellow can come in there. He can see that and figure that out. Yellow has a meta understanding of human nature and conflict. Yellow is aware of backfiring mechanisms. That's a lot of what systems thinking is about, is looking forward at how a system is going to move such that the system is going to cycle back in and feed into itself. Systems are all about various kinds of feedback loops. So this is very important, for example, for public policy and for running a good government. Because a lot of times you create some sort of law or you make some sort of change in public policy, but then that ends up actually worsening the problem in ways that weren't expected. So yellow is good at anticipating those mechanisms. Yellow has an uncanny skill at resolving complex issues. Yellow has a sense of awe and playful delight with the new and the novel. I can relate to that one. For yellow, authority is contextual, which means that the leader is going to be the best equipped and the most capable. So if you get a small group of, let's say, 10 yellow people all together, who's going to turn out to be the leader? Well, they're all going to talk amongst each other, and they're going to decide, okay, what's the problem we're working on? Let's say these 10 people are working on green energy. Okay, green energy. Which one of us has the most knowledge? Who has a PhD in green energy here? Who's read the most books on green energy? Oh, you did? Okay, so now you're going to be in charge. That's how yellow determines the leader. Whereas at the other stages, it's not about that. Like for orange, for example, or for blue, the leader is going to be the one who is next in line in the hierarchy in the chain, or that's for blue. For orange, the leader is going to be the one who is the most ambitious and probably the most ruthless and the most manipulative. So every stage has a different leadership structure. Yellow favors minimal consumption. Yellow enjoys human appetites but doesn't become a slave to them. Yellow can be gentle or ruthless, conformist or nonconformist. It's hard to pin yellow down because yellow is kind of slippery and a bit of a chameleon. Yellow is good at finding win-win-win solutions. What is a win-win-win solution? It's a triple win solution. What's the triple win? So the first two wins is like if we're dealing together, let's say we're doing an oil deal. The oil company and the government are doing some kind of oil deal with environmental regulations or something like that, right? So, of course, one party could win, the other party could lose. Or both parties could find a solution that's winning for both parties. That's good, but that's usually what orange looks for, if it can. But then there's the third level, which is finding the third win. The third win is that the entire spiral wins. It's looking out for the entire spiral. So can we find a solution that's good for you and for me and for the entire ecological system as a whole? See, that's an extra dimension of thinking, 3D thinking rather than 2D thinking. Yellow doesn't join wholeheartedly in group experiences, does not join. So yellow tends to be a bit of a lone wolf. Yellow prefers to keep a low profile and to stay on the edges of an organization. Yellow doesn't usually like a lot of attention. Yellow tends to work in the background. Yellow will not sacrifice himself for the commune the way that green would. And yellow has a softened masculinity. In orange, masculinity was all about being alpha and being macho and demonstrating your macho-ness with various kinds of gross material displays. So you would display your muscles or how much you could bench press at the gym or how expensive your sports car was or how hot your girlfriend was. That was sort of what masculinity was about at orange. But once you pass through green, green softens you up, makes you more compassionate, more empathetic, puts you as a man, if you're a man, puts you in touch with your feminine side a bit more. So your masculinity becomes more integrated. And at yellow, you can be masculine, still have a feminine side, and that only heightens your masculinity. Women, of course, love this because women actually don't like jerks who are just flaunting their masculinity around. They only like that in the short term. They don't like that in the long term. And so really, this is the best of both worlds. Orange, you might say, is a sort of juvenile, immature masculinity, whereas yellow is a more mature, softened masculinity, and that's just the right balance that you should be looking for as a man. So let's go into some examples of yellow, people and various domains and things that are yellow. So first, what I have for you is Abraham Maslow. He's a really good example of a stage yellow thinker. Another great example that I love is Eben Pagan. Eben Pagan, he's not a very well-known self-help guru and personal development guru and sort of business marketing guru, but he has some amazing courses and he does some amazing workshops. I don't know if he still does them, but he used to. And he's just like the perfect example of what a stage yellow person is like. He's very neutral. He's very balanced and fair. He's able to think at and look at the world from multiple perspectives, from the scientific perspective, from the business perspective, from the emotional, artistic perspective, kind of blend it all together, and there's just perfect mix. Noam Chomsky, I mentioned him in the green episode about how he's an example of green. And he is because he has a lot of liberal, progressive sort of ideas, but also he's beyond green. Because also what I notice in Noam Chomsky, which I find so remarkable and beautiful, is that he's able to be very neutral. Now, of course, if you're a right-winger or you're a conservative, you're saying to yourself, Leo, what are you smoking? How can Noam Chomsky be neutral when he's so progressive and he has all these radical socialist ideas? Well, you have to understand what neutrality really is. Neutrality doesn't mean that you take the middle ground between all perspectives. So if you have one person in a debate arguing against slavery and one person arguing for slavery, neutrality doesn't mean that you just say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll just go with something in the middle. That's not true neutrality. True neutrality is about being very careful to step outside of your own self-biases, your own egoic agenda, and looking at the situation and deciding what the real facts are based on a sort of a unbiased look. And sometimes what that means is that you'll side with one side. It doesn't mean that you'll go down the middle on every issue. So what Noam Chomsky is good at, he's good at looking, for example, at American foreign policy and seeing how selfish it is, which of course disturbs a lot of stage orange and stage blue people who are Americans, because you tend to be blind to the selfish policies, foreign policy of your own country. But Noam Chomsky is good at kind of stepping outside of that. So he's a real good thinker to model in terms of that. Whether you agree with his political ideas or not, that's a separate issue. What I'm talking about here is a sort of attitude. It's an attitude of looking at the world from outside of your own perspective and gathering information from lots and lots of diverse sources. This is something that stage blue and orange just cannot really do. Other examples, Fritjof Capra is a really great example of a systems thinker. He has a lot of books that he's written specifically about systems thinking. Carl Sagan, quantum mechanics as a field, and the fathers of quantum mechanics like David Bohm, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Arthur Eddington, Richard Feynman, Freeman Dyson, John Archibald Wheeler, all of these people and others like them, these tended to be the most cutting-edge scientists. And actually, many of these people were even beyond yellow. They were at the highest end of yellow, starting to peak into turquoise, which is why many of them became mystics, or at least they studied mysticism, and they were very open and ultimately favorable to mysticism. And if you want to know more about that, then go check out my episode about quantum mechanics, the two-part series. In part 2 is where I give you a lot of quotes from them, which shows the evidence of how receptive they were to the mystical perspective. And they were able to find a really good balance between the science, the cutting-edge science of quantum mechanics 100 years ago that was being developed, and mysticism and spirituality. Other examples, Paul Feyerabend, Kurt Gödel, Obama, President Obama. Now, again, if you're a conservative or right-wing, you're going to have a problem with this because it seems like I'm putting Obama so high. It's like, Leo, no, Obama wasn't that high. And you might even criticize me from the left here by saying that, no, Leo, how could you say Obama was yellow when in fact Obama he sold out to the capitalists and to the corporate Democrats? Look, I don't want to make this a political discussion. We're talking about something way beyond politics. We're talking about attitude. If you look at interviews with Obama, look at how he talks, look at how he analyzes issues. He's a very complex thinker. He thinks in terms of systems. He thinks in terms of ecology. I'm not just talking about the environment. Ecology is more than just saving trees or saving the rainforests. Ecology, everything in government should really be about ecology. It's about how do you create systems that sustain themselves, that don't ultimately end up cannibalizing or backfiring. Now, of course, I don't know Obama personally. I don't know the intricacies and the details of how he thinks, but just the idea I get by looking at interviews with him is that he's a yellow type of thinker. Now, you have to understand, though, just because you have a yellow thinker doesn't mean you put this guy in office and all of a sudden he solves all of our problems. That's not how it works at all. Because when you take a yellow person and you put him into a giant bureaucracy, which is predominantly blue and orange and is completely corrupted by lobbying and corporate interests and religious interests and all sorts of other things, then you have almost no chance of success in that kind of situation, which is what Obama ran into. He was obstructed and really he was ahead of his time. Right now, America is not ready for a yellow president. America needs a green president first before it can get a yellow president. Even a green president is going to be problematic because the right wing is going to resist him so much. And that's fine. That's just where we're at. That's okay. And of course, Obama, I'm sure he has a lot of green in him as well, and I'm sure he has still plenty of orange in him, and I'm sure that he was influenced by corporate interests and stuff like that. So again, let's not get into all the nitty-gritty political debates here, because this is taking our eye off the ball. Speaking of which, we've got George Soros as another example of a yellow thinker. Now again, You might criticize George Soros because you disagree with his political views, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is think about how he thinks about the markets. Think about how he thinks about public policy. And you're going to start to see that he's a long-term systems thinker. Joseph Campbell is a really good example of stage yellow. The psychologist Eric Fromm, Claire Graves, of course, Don Beck, and spiral dynamics. These are the epitomes of yellow thinking. Ilya Pergonin, chaos theory, cybernetics, biomimetics, NLP, Alfred Korzybski. The leading edge of academia tends to skew yellow. Futurists, and an example from Star Trek is the humans or the Vulcans. So what's interesting in Star Trek is that the humans in Star Trek, they don't behave like normal 21st century humans. There's a certain elevation with which they talk with each other, how they relate, even when they have a dispute or a problem on the Enterprise or whatever ship they're on. They're always resolving their problems in a sort of yellow meta level way. And the Vulcans are also sort of logical, left-brained, and kind of sophisticated, complex thinkers. And for the humans in Star Trek, what do they have? They have the Prime Directive. What is the Prime Directive? Don't interfere with the goings-on of other species and races. That's their most important rule. That's a very yellow sort of rule, right? Because the humans in Star Trek, they're conscious enough to recognize that if we get involved with all the stuff that's going on in the star systems and all the galaxies that are out there, then we're probably going to create more damage than if we just let those people naturally evolve. So even though the humans in Star Trek, they run across all sorts of primitive races that are fighting with each other, tribal warfare and racism and all these sorts of problems, but they don't get pushy about having those people change because they know that those people need to evolve on their own terms. So they try to help where they can, where they see that a sort of strategic acupunctural intervention is available. But if it's not, generally they just try to let the thing run its course. That's a very yellow attitude. Other examples of yellow: sustainable living, ecology, eco-cities, and these modern versions of urban planning that are happening now in certain cities, like in the Middle East, in Dubai and other cities in the United Emirates and Qatar. They're developing and building these sort of like totally new cities in the desert from scratch. And they're designing it to make sure that they're eco-friendly and all the roads and everything is built in such a way that it's perfect for human life and like it's well organized and designed. That's a yellow sort of design. Conflict resolution. Shinzen Young's mindfulness system, if you're familiar with that one. Now, Shinzen Young himself, I would place at turquoise, actually. But also, there's a certain facet of Shinzen and his teachings which is very, very yellow. He's very nerdy. He likes to bring science into it. He likes to analyze it to death. And he has this whole complicated matrix of different meditation techniques. And here's what you do this way, that way. You know, he's turned into this whole system, which strikes me as a very yellow approach to Vipassana. Wikipedia is a yellow sort of project. Ludwig Wittgenstein, Jacques Derrida, Buckminster Fuller, Willard Quine, Sergey Brin, and Larry Page of Google strike me as very forward-thinking, visionary, yellow strategic thinkers. And Steve Jobs from Apple, Paul Allen from Microsoft. These are similar type of minded people. Elon Musk, even though I've mentioned him before when I was talking about Orange, for example, I think Musk is also a systems thinker. He's a nuanced thinker, and so he definitely has plenty of yellow in him. It's just a question of how much orange, how much yellow, how much green. He's somewhere in there. Joe Rogan, I think, is a pretty good example of someone who's green and beyond. It's interesting because Joe Rogan has a lot of fans who follow him who are in the blue/orange because Rogan has a sort of macho appearance and also sort of talks about macho topics sometimes. He's a comedian, so he's very easy to relate to, and just people find him interesting and kind of charismatic. But what I think a lot of viewers miss is how evolved Rogan is. Rogan is into psychedelics. Rogan is into spirituality. Rogan is into looking at reality from all sorts of perspectives. That's why he's very open-minded. He's able to listen to people talking about this politics and this technology and this science and that history and this archaeology and just like everything, just like this smorgasbord of stuff. And he's able to maintain his sort of neutrality on all that stuff, which is really remarkable. That's not easy to do. Not easy to do in a position like he has. He could easily just have become an ideologue like Alex Jones, but he's not, because he's more evolved than that. Whether that's because he's taken so much psychedelics and weed and all this sort of stuff, edibles, 5-MeO, I don't know what it's from, but it's great. Sometimes people think, oh, but he's so macho and all this. Yeah, he's macho, but at the same time, look, like he hunts his own meat. So even though he's not a vegan, he himself has said that he's so disgusted, for example, with factory farming of animals, that if he didn't hunt his own meat, he would be a vegan. So he made like a decision: should I go hunt my own meat the way like our ancestors did? And he finds that to be integrous with his philosophy and way of living life, and that's fine. That's exactly the kind of yellow move that you would make. You would say, well, I don't like factory farming, so either I'm going to become a vegan, or hey, maybe I'm just going to go like hunt my own deer with a bow and arrow. And then that makes it a little bit more challenging, and it's both fun for me, and it also maybe actually helps overcrowded populations in certain areas where there's too many deer and they're just shooting them and they're going to waste. So maybe I can go hunt there. So it's a very kind of systems thinking approach. I should also mention Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson again. I've talked about them in the past as exhibiting stages of orange and maybe even stages and shades of blue. But really, if you want to give the most charitable evaluation of these two thinkers, then I think you have to say that they have quite a bit of yellow in them. Now, are they 100% solid yellow? I would say no. And the reason I would say that, for example, for Sam Harris, is because I feel like he doesn't quite, for example, know how to integrate Islam properly. I feel like he demonizes it and judges it. I feel like he's also kind of moralistic. And I feel like he's not seeing the entire spiral. I feel like he's still reacting against certain lower stages in the spiral and not fully integrating and not really finding a way to bridge those different gaps. He's still stuck on some sort of ideology. There's still some sort of rationalism in him that he's kind of like pushing and trying to get in there. He's not truly able to be neutral. So that's holding him back. So maybe he's like 50% yellow and also got plenty of green and orange in him. And as far as Jordan Peterson, also, I think Jordan Peterson, he is a sophisticated and nuanced thinker. He does pull from many different sources. He does read a lot. He does study a lot. He brings in a lot of information into his lectures and so forth, which is great. So in that sense, he's yellow. So maybe he's 50% yellow. Maybe he's 80% yellow. I don't know. I ultimately don't know these people well enough to make a fully accurate evaluation of them. Only they can know where they're really at. But again, I think Peterson is stuck in certain regressive elements of orange and blue because he's sort of stuck on this pushing this sort of masculinity agenda. I don't know what that is about. That seems very regressive to me. He's also stuck on this sort of moralization in the same way that Sam Harris is, not willing to admit that morality is an invention of the human mind. And there's still a sort of ideology there. Just like there's not a recognition of the entire spiral. There's not a recognition of really like trying to truly see the world from different perspectives. It's still kind of a pushing of his perspective on the world, which you see him doing. So that's holding him back. Now again, I'm giving you lots of examples of people in every one of these spiral episodes that I do. And the reason I do that is because I think that it helps you to see how practical spiral dynamics is and how you can actually apply it in your own life. Because if I just came up here and I just gave you a bunch of abstract principles and values, you wouldn't see how it connects. That's why I give you all these political examples and controversial examples and all this sort of stuff. A lot of these people, I don't know them personally, and I haven't read and studied all of their work in depth. So my evaluations of them could be misguided, or maybe I'm only seeing a certain facet of their personality, but not the full thing. That's because I'm just kind of throwing this out there loosely for you. You should take this model and apply it for yourself, and you might have different evaluations. You might look at some of these people that I've categorized as yellow or orange or green or blue, and you might say, no, Leo, they're really something else. They're higher or they're lower. Okay, fine. That's what I want you to do. Don't just take these examples blindly from me. Think through them for yourself. And ultimately remember that it's not about evaluating other people. It's mostly using this as a tool for growing yourself. So the person you should be most concerned about evaluating is yourself, and that's why I'm giving you all these examples. And of course, the last example is Actualized.org. Actualized.org is, I think, a really good example of what yellow looks like. I try to present to you many, many different perspectives, if you haven't noticed yet. A very multi-perspectival approach. I can talk to you about insights from Christianity, from Zen, from Buddhism, from yoga, from Tantra, from Judaism, from Islam, from science, from quantum mechanics, from evolutionary theory, from mathematics, from logic, from psychology, from business, from stuff I learned from pickup and stuff I learned from online marketing and video games. Like all of it comes together into this giant melting pot. And from that, you get the most rich and diverse perspective. That's really my whole secret to getting a deep understanding of reality, is that I recognized a long time ago, back when I was about 16 or 18 years old, when I first started to really think deeply about the metaphysics and epistemology of reality, is I noticed that the biggest problem that I see people all around me making, and people throughout history, is that they get stuck in one perspective, in one paradigm, and then they're not able to break out of it. So my solution to that was very, very simple and very pragmatic. What I decided is that I'm going to scour hundreds of different sources, very diverse sources, which challenge my opinions. And that's why I was able to grow so much over the last 5 or 10 years. Because when I started out 10 years ago, I was a materialist, an atheist. I didn't believe in God. I just blindly accepted evolution. I dismissed intelligent design. I dismissed psychedelics. There's so much stuff I dismissed. But the one thing I had going for me, which allowed me to correct all that stuff when other people are not able to correct it, I see them getting stuck all the time in this stuff, is because fundamentally, I didn't lock myself into any one perspective. And so I just kept reading and researching and staying very open-minded and trying different stuff, exploring psychedelics, exploring different religions, going to different retreats, talking to different people, interviewing, flying around the country, flying around the world, doing yoga and doing this and doing that, watching a lot of diverse videos, reading tons of books, having my own insights, doing a lot of contemplation. And through that entire process, just like a whole new world opened up to me. Stuff that would be completely unimaginable 10 years ago for me. And the one thing that made it happen is simply my open-mindedness and my yellow attitude of looking for more and more diverse perspectives. You have to love looking at the world from alternative points of view. Let me give you a couple of final examples that will really help you to understand yellow. So let's take the example of vegetarianism. What does vegetarianism look like at green versus yellow? A green vegetarian is usually sort of an obnoxious, proselytizing vegetarian. So the green vegetarian, she has her epiphany that eating animals is wrong and factory farming is horrible and disgusting. And so now she's very empathetic and sympathetic. So she joins the vegetarian movement, and now she goes out there and she protests, and she's an animal rights activist and all this. And anytime she sees someone eating meat, this triggers her. This makes her emotional. She says, "How could you?" And she judges them, and she tries to convert them, and she tries to tell them about, oh, but the benefits of vegetarianism, right? And she's a little bit over the top with it. Whereas a yellow vegetarian still basically understands all that same stuff, but is more mellow and tempered, and has an additional higher level understanding, a meta understanding, that you can't just take a meat eater who is hooked and addicted to eating meat and just moralize to them and proselytize and convert them into a vegetarian. That's not an effective strategy. Yellow understands that, yes, we can discuss all these issues, but I'm not going to go out of my way to force anybody to become a vegetarian. And so yellow is more laid back and chill about the whole process. So yellow cares, but yellow is not a bleeding heart. And yellow understands that person who's a meat eater, he has to go through his own process. You see, he's not going to learn from my experiences. He has to learn from his own experiences. So maybe I can float that balloon out there, and I can bring up this possibility to one of my meat eater friends or something. If I'm a yellow vegetarian, I can kind of put that idea out there for them, but I'm not going to push them too much, and I'm going to kind of let them come to their own conclusions, right? Because I'm sensitive to the fact that they need to move up the spiral. In the same way that if you have a small child, you can't just proselytize or browbeat that child into learning calculus. The child will learn calculus once he goes through arithmetic, and he learns his multiplication tables, and he learns geometry and trigonometry. He goes to high school, and maybe at the very end of high school, he can start to learn calculus. He has to grow into it. He can't learn it at first grade. And there's nothing wrong with him for not being able to learn it in first grade. Let me give you a few more examples of yellow. Specifically, let's focus on yellow political solutions, public policy solutions. In the Middle East, with the economy, with the education system, and with the healthcare system. So here's how a yellow person would look at problems in the Middle East. And there are lots of different problems in the Middle East. There are problems with the Israelis and Palestinians. There are problems within Iraq. There are religious problems and human rights problems. So there's a lot of stuff to tackle there. But let's take the Israeli-Palestinian problem. So an orange or a blue person would look at that problem, and he would take a side. He would say, oh, the Israelis are right, or the Palestinians are right. And then he would support one of those causes. Whereas the yellow person will look at the entire situation, and first, before jumping in with any kind of policy prescriptions, yellow will say, let's actually get down on the ground. Let's go interview some Israelis and Palestinians, and let's see where they're at. Where are they in the spiral? What percentage of Israel and what percentage of Palestine is at stage red, blue, orange, green, and so forth? So let's first do that. Let's have interviews with these people. Let's really understand their perspective. Let's understand the Israeli perspective and the Palestinian perspective. Let's see where there's common ground, and let's see where the differences are. Let's see where there are common values. So yellow will try to take all the stakeholders into account, making sure not to exclude anybody. Yellow is not going to come in there and act opinionated and push his own political agenda. Because yellow's highest agenda is just to have a healthy system. How do we get a healthy system working in Israel and in Palestine that works for both of them? So after yellow assesses all the values, then yellow will try to establish a superordinate goal that both sides can agree to and some common shared values that they can both work on. And yellow will try to teach both sides about spiral dynamics and how this model can help them avoid the various traps. And one of the things that Yellow is going to be very careful about is making sure to diffuse ideological polarization, which is so common in the Middle East, especially with Israelis and Palestinians. And if you think that what I'm describing here is some pipe dream that only works in a textbook, you're very wrong, because actually Don Beck, the developer of spiral dynamics, and people that he's worked with and students that have studied under him, they have actually done this exact process that I'm describing with the Israelis and the Palestinians. They worked there for 10 years in the early and middle 2000s, doing exactly this process, and they were having some great results. But of course, the situation there is very political, and it's much more difficult than it seems. And they ran into some obstacles with funding, because they need funding to run this project. They ran into a problem because they had funding for a while. They were doing this whole scheme there, and they were getting good results. And they were actually able to teach spiral dynamics to stage purple and red and blue Israelis and Palestinians, which the majority of them are. But they ran out of funding in 2008 when the stock market collapsed and the global recession happened. And so that derailed their plans. But spiral dynamics is one of the best tools we've got, for example, if you really care about solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and many other conflicts in the Middle East. So it's a very powerful system. I'm actually going to add a book to my book list in the future that describes how spiral dynamics, for example, applies specifically to Middle East problems, and also add a book about how spiral dynamics applies to economic problems here in the United States. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about how a yellow person would look at the economy. The problem with economy is that most economists and politicians have strong opinions about how the economy should be. And so basically they're ideologues. They're either staunch capitalists, the Milton Friedmans of the world, or staunch libertarians, or the sort of Ayn Randians, or they are like the socialists and the communists and whatever else, the progressives, right? So people take sides, and the difference between doing all that and a tier 2 approach, a stage yellow approach, is that a stage yellow person, again, would come in there and say, okay, what are the systemic problems in our economy? Who are all the stakeholders? The people at Wall Street, what's their value system? What level are they at? What are their fears? What are their concerns? And what about our, the religious right in this country? What are their concerns? What are their values? What are their opinions on the economy? And what's the average person's opinions in New York or in California about the economy? And what are the different value systems? And what is actually causing these recessions and problems that we have in the economy, or the sort of capitalistic exploitation, cannibalism that we start to see? What's causing this? And so he will actually do studies, do research, not just take ideological positions, but actually do the study, do the science, figure that out, and then come up with systemic solutions for that. See? But in order to do that, notice how neutral and objective you have to be. You have to not be biased, and you have to not be ideological. You could imagine a similar type of approach with the education system. Again, with the education system, people become ideological. They say, well, I'm for public schools. And the other person will say, no, I'm for private schools. And then they'll have some sort of debate about this. This doesn't solve anything. A yellow person would look at the systemic issues within our education system. Actually take a look. Where are the problems? What solutions have we tried in the past that haven't worked? Let's go to different corners of the world and analyze different systems that they have and find the best system, maybe in Europe, maybe in Asia, maybe in Australia. Where do they have the best test scores? Maybe in Scandinavia. Let's go find those. Let's see what they're doing right. Let's try to integrate that into our system. And then what would be the obstacles? How do we make sure that all the stakeholders are satisfied here? Not just so that we're jamming our own ideological position down someone's throat. And of course, the same thing with the healthcare system. So there you start to see just how practical spiral dynamics can be, and that if you really care about solving these problems, notice that these problems, like in the Middle East, the economy, the education problem, the healthcare problem, these are intractable sort of problems. These are problems that have existed for probably 50 or 100 years, or maybe even more. And no matter how much we try, whether Republicans come into power, Democrats come into power, whatever, we're not able to solve them, which tells you there's a deeper systemic issue. We're not getting to the root of it. So yellow would actually focus on doing that. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that yellow would succeed in every situation. Yellow isn't flawless. But you can see that this is a much more intelligent approach. All right, let's take a quick intermission. Don't go anywhere because I'll be right back. All right, let's talk about how to know if you are really yellow. I think that there can be quite a few people who are starting to shift into yellow, but they're not quite solid yellow. And as I was studying yellow in a lot of depth in preparation for this episode, I really started to become aware of certain areas where I still have more growing to do to really become solid in yellow. And so I came up with, just for myself, some pointers to test myself to see, am I really solid yellow or am I still regressing back into the first tier? So I think this is important to cover. So here's how you know. This, and I cannot stress this enough, are you non-judgmental? This, I think, is perhaps the most important quality of being solid yellow. And this one is really tricky because it's difficult to give up your judgmentality. It's just something you've been doing your whole life. It's something that you see in the news. It's something you see all your friends doing all around you. It's been done, and your family has been doing it. So this is one of those things that's very counterintuitive, to surrender all of your judgments, because your ego is telling you, no, I got to keep judging, Leo. If I stop judging, then all of this bad stuff will happen to me. Which, of course, is just a trick. That's not true at all. To really get to the highest levels in life, you have to stop judging. Have you stopped demonizing people? Have you stopped debating and arguing with people? This is completely pointless as a distraction. Have you stopped moralizing and blaming and scapegoating? Have you stopped crusading? This point about crusading is very important. Tier 1 people go on intellectual, ideological crusades. I'm not talking about physical, violent crusades. Most of us are way beyond that. At least I hope you are. But many of us still get trapped in ideological crusades, where we go on rants against people, and we have our favorite enemy, whether it's the right or the left, or it's the progressives, or it's the neo-Nazis and the alt-righters, or whatever it is. You got some sort of ideological bug up your ass. And that's driving you. That's preventing you from becoming solid yellow. Let it go. And that's hard for some people to do because people build an entire career out of crusading against something. So that's very tricky. So make sure that you don't corner yourself into a career where you have to do crusading in order to pay your bills. Because if you paint yourself into that corner, then guess what? You're going to justify your crusading, and you're probably going to keep doing it because it's paying your bills. And what else are you going to do? Watch out for that. Also, are you able to be impartial? Like really impartial? Really be able to step outside of your own agenda? That's so important for yellow. Can you see the world through the lower stages? Do you see the validity of the lower stages, or do you think that the lower stages should not exist? That's a key differentiator between Tier 1 and Tier 2. Do you see that every perspective is partially true? There's something you can learn from every perspective. I don't care how vile it is. I don't care how ridiculous it seems. There's something there you can learn if you can just let your own agenda go, actually step into the shoes of the other person, see the world from their perspective, and there was something you will learn from that. Now, I'm not saying that you should go become a Nazi. What I'm saying is that you can look at the world from the perspective of a Nazi and learn something. That doesn't mean that now you are a Nazi and that now you will think that that is the only true perspective. All right, so be careful about that, because it's very easy for the ego to say, aha, Leo, so what you're saying is that every perspective is partially true. That means all of my egoic perspectives that other people are criticizing, they're actually true. And so you're just justifying what I've always believed is true. No, I'm not. That's not what I'm doing. I'm actually trying to get you to step outside of your perspective. So whatever you believe, let it go and go explore other perspectives. And if you are having difficulty doing that, then you're not really solidly yellow yet. You have more growing to do. And the more you are able to do that, the more yellow you will become. Also, are you genuinely curious to explore other points of view? This isn't just something that you do because I'm forcing you to do it. It's not like a bitter pill you have to swallow. A yellow person actually enjoys jumping between different points of view. It's actually fun. It's exciting. It's interesting. You're looking at the world from different perspectives. That means you're always seeing something new. You're learning something new. That's exciting. That's interesting. Rather than just being stuck in your boring Christian perspective or your boring Muslim perspective or your boring rationalist logical perspective. Also, are you able to go meta? Are you able to, by going meta, what I mean is stepping outside of whatever dynamic you're observing, seeing the meta mechanism. This could be whether you're in a university or whether you're reading a book or whether you're exploring religion or something like that. You need to be able to step outside of the thing that you are participating in to really be able to observe it impartially. Do you see that mankind's problems are not personal, but systemic? And they are really nobody's fault. That's huge to be able to see that. Until you can see this, you're going to scapegoat and blame people because you're going to think, oh, it's the liberals' fault, or it's the Arabs' fault, or it's the Christians' fault, or it's the evangelicals. Oh, it's those ignorant people. It's those people. It's that. That's really not the issue. The issue is systemic. We have systemic problems of ignorance, of lack of education. We have systemic problems in the medical industry. We have systemic economic problems. We have systemic racial problems and gender problems and cultural problems and religious and spiritual problems and scientific problems, and they're all systemic. So if we want to solve them, we need to, first of all, acknowledge that, stop blaming people, and then we can get serious about understanding the system, studying the system, right? Because when you take an issue personally, when you think that the Israeli-Palestinian problem is a personal problem because of those ugly Palestinians or those ugly Israelis, you're not getting anywhere. That doesn't lead to any serious solutions. And it's not really true that that problem exists because one or the other side is ugly or bad or evil. There's a systemic issue there that you haven't recognized yet. Here are some common sayings from a stage yellow perspective. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that we use to create them. The map is not the territory. Every perspective is part true and part false. Wisdom is knowing what you don't know. Perspective is everything. The better the model, the bigger the problem. New times require new thinking. Different strokes for different folks. It takes all kinds. That last one is important. What that means, it takes all kinds, is that when you're a systems thinker, you understand that not everyone in the world can be nor should be exactly like you. And in fact, if the world was that way, then it would be a terrible problem. It would be a terrible problem if every human being was a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist or a libertarian or a Marxist or whatever else. That would be a terrible problem. the world requires specialization. The world is like a giant ant colony, and in an ant colony, you have your worker ants, you have your warrior ants, you have your breeding ants, you have other kinds of ants, and they all work together. They all specialize in different things, different kinds, and they all balance out in the end, but there are these interesting asymmetries which lead to the smooth functioning of this entire ant colony. So you got to start to see mankind in that way. And when you see human societies that way, then you stop trying to proselytize everybody to be just like you, to think just like you, to believe just like you, to have exactly your perspective. So that's a good little tip there for becoming more yellow. What triggers yellow? Well, what's interesting is that there's a difference now between Tier 1 and Tier 2 in how Tier 2 gets triggered. Tier 2 is not easy to trigger. But of course, yellow is not perfect, so it does still get triggered, but usually it'll take more to trigger yellow, and yellow will not get triggered in nearly as severe and emotional ways as the Tier 1 colors will. So in a nutshell, what triggers yellow is the blindness and the infighting of Tier 1. Because yellow has this amazing vision for how mankind could be if we could just all get together, stop fighting, stop scapegoating each other, and really wake up to what's going on, wake up to all the systemic dynamics. But of course, even though yellow understands all that, yellow also understands that Tier 1 hasn't gotten there yet, but sometimes yellow can forget that and can get frustrated nonetheless. So at Tier 2, maybe it's not so much about getting triggered, it's more about being frustrated with the lack of progress or the lack of awareness that exists all around the world. As a stage yellow, you're going to be pretty lonely. You're going to be less than 1% of the entire population. So it's going to be hard for you to find like-minded individuals, although you can, so don't turn that into a limiting belief. But generally, you're not going to be understood by the average person on the street. And your views are not going to be represented in the media, in politics, on online forums, in magazines, and so forth. So you got to be ready for that. What else triggers yellow? Black and white thinking, because yellow is the exact opposite. That yellow is a nuanced thinker. Non-systemic thinking. People who think too short-term. Yellow can be triggered by excessive rationalism, reductionism, and scientism. People who turn science into a religion or a dogma. And of course, yellow is frustrated with all kinds of dogmatic and ideological people, of which there are plenty of on all sides, including in universities and in churches and in different countries. Everywhere you find ideological people. Yellow is frustrated by conformity and groupthink. Yellow is frustrated by polarization, demonization, and radicals. One of the biggest problems for yellow is radicals, because every group tends to have its radical elements, whether it's the left or the right, or the Muslims, or the Israelis, or whoever else. There's going to be a small core of radicals. These are the ideologues, usually stage blue, maybe stage orange or so, or stage green sometimes. These are the radicals. And they will try to radicalize the average members of the group who are not radicals and turn them radical such that the radicals now have this crusade, because the radicals are on a crusade. And so what this antagonizes both sides, and nothing can get resolved in this situation. So one of the biggest enemies for yellow is these radicals. And they can frustrate yellow because these radicals will spoil yellow's plans. And in fact, what the radicals will do is the radicals, of course, will demonize yellow and call yellow a radical. Because that's what radicals do. They just project onto everybody else. Of course, yellow is not a radical, but when you're a blue or orange or a green radical, you can't see that. And in fact, the radicals will criticize yellow and say, oh, yellow is too neutral. Yellow isn't passionate enough. Yellow is just trying to take the middle road everywhere. And that's not actually true, but from the radicals' perspective, that's how it can look. What else frustrates yellow is people who don't understand spiral dynamics. That can be very frustrating. Spiral dynamics is a pretty complicated system. It takes a long time to explain it, a long time to really learn it. And so once you do have spiral dynamics in your tool belt and you use that as a lens to look at the world, you can see so many problems that are just so obvious, and you can see all the solutions from within spiral dynamics. But of course, nobody else out there knows spiral dynamics the way that you do. And so they are going to be blind to the obvious things that you see. And actually, they're going to be in denial about it too. Because tier 1 is generally in denial about spiral dynamics. Yellow is triggered by consumerism and profiteering. Religion can trigger yellow. Fixed structures, which offer no space for knowledge development, analysis, or conceptualizing. That can really frustrate yellow. Red tape and bureaucracy can frustrate yellow. Working in groups can be frustrating for yellow because yellow is a visionary. Yellow kind of just like gets down to the nitty-gritty, does the research, kind of gets his hands dirty and figures stuff out. Whereas in a group, usually people are waffling and they're just talking and wasting time, and that can frustrate yellow. Yellow is frustrated by myopia, the lack of vision that people have. When you're a visionary, it's pretty lonely because most people don't share your vision. And so you have to cultivate that vision within yourself. And that's what my life purpose course is about, is to help you to do that. And I feel like a lot of the content that I release is really about helping you to kind of cultivate your own vision for yourself, whether it's for your own enlightenment, your own awakening, your own development, or for some impact you want to have in the world, your life purpose, and then kind of push that through, despite the fact that the world around you is not going to be supportive of those efforts, generally speaking. Yellow can be frustrated by how most people are focused on short-term petty human issues rather than the higher issues of, I would call these the spiritual issues, the metaphysical issues, the existential issues, the global issues that face mankind. Yellow is frustrated by people who lack an interest in the big picture, people who are overly technical and focused on trivia. And yellow can be triggered by politics and gamesmanship and manipulation, because yellow wants to rise above all that, and yellow doesn't like being sucked back in to politics. What are some of the limitations of yellow? In prior episodes, I talked about the unhealthy excesses of each color. With yellow, there's not much in yellow that is unhealthy. But there are limitations to yellow which keep it from growing into turquoise. So here's what they are. Yellow is still stuck in duality in most cases. And there's no deep mysticism possible within yellow because yellow is still way too much in the thinking mind. Too much thinking, too much modeling. And as a result, even though yellow could be aware of the problem of confusing the map for the territory, yellow still will probably fall into the trap of confusing the map for the territory. It's just such a tricky trap to avoid. And really, to avoid it, you have to escape the mind. But yellow is probably not ready to do that yet because yellow is still so fascinated by all these concepts, all these models, all these systems that yellow is analyzing and synthesizing. And so to move beyond that, you're going to have to start to let that go. And of course, that's yellow's bread and butter. That's probably how yellow earns a living, so that might be a little tricky for yellow. Yellow could just be unwilling to transcend models and concepts. I know that's something that I've wrestled with over the last couple of years as I've been trying to transition to turquoise. It's tricky. It's tricky because you've amassed all these great models and concepts, including, of course, spiral dynamics. And then what you need to do is you need to let it go. And that's one of those really counterintuitive moves that will probably take you a few years to figure out. Yellow can get bogged down in complex analysis. Yellow can develop an intellectual hubris because yellow does know a lot of stuff. Yellow does understand much more than your average person, but then that can lead to a form of arrogance. Another limitation of yellow is that yellow can invent beautiful futuristic solutions, but that are not pragmatic. They might look great on paper, but then he can't actualize them. Another problem for yellow is not being able to finish something because there's always some new great vision that comes to you the next day. To really actualize those visions, you got to work on them for years. But yellow has so many different visions, always thinking about new ideas, making new discoveries in the conceptual mindscape, that it can become difficult to actually actualize something tangible and produce the results that yellow knows are possible. Yellow usually needs a team of people to help him to actualize his results, but the problem for yellow is that yellow tends to be a cold individualist and a loner. And yellow becomes too isolated. And this becomes a limitation because then yellow can't really actualize his vision, and also because, again, yellow starts to feel a little lonely and disconnected. Yellow can be limited in that he can't build a community, which is really what's necessary to solve the world's problems. Yellow can forget to connect with people because he is too focused on models and ideas rather than relationships. So what's necessary for yellow is, again, sort of a swinging of the pendulum back a little bit more towards the communal side, which of course is anticipating turquoise. Yellow can be emotionally distant. And in the end, yellow has to realize this fundamental limitation of this stage, which is that all this understanding that you are developing and amassing still does not equal happiness. No matter how well you understand the world, no matter how good your models are, no matter how correct you are, you're still not happy. Why is that? Well, because happiness is not found in the mind. And yellow might hit his head against the wall for many, many years before he finally admits to himself that he's not going to find happiness inside his mind with all of his models. Another limitation of yellow is a lack of embodiment. Yellow can know all this stuff about the world and about politics and about psychology, even about spirituality, even about mysticism. Because yellow can read a bunch of books about mysticism, but there's a big difference between reading a bunch of books about non-duality and actually being able to embody it, which is also something that I've been wrestling with as I've been trying to transition to turquoise from yellow the last couple of years, is that embodiment is really much, much, much harder than simply understanding and modeling and conceptualizing. And so I've done a lot of that because I need to share this stuff with you, but also I need to work a lot on my embodiment. And so that's what I've been doing lately through yoga and psychedelics and meditation retreats and so forth. And of course, the embodiment is the really hard part. And that's what'll take you decades to do. And it's frustrating because as yellow, you have this vision of who you can be and how you can awaken and how you can transform the world, but you lack the embodiment to do it. You lack the spiritual purification necessary to do it. You lack the selflessness that's necessary to do it. You lack maybe the discipline. Maybe you lack the socialization skills, some of these communal building skills that are necessary to do it. So that can be scary because that shows yellow, oh my God, there's still so much work to be done. I can't just rest on all my models and all my concepts. And ultimately, the limitation of yellow is that yellow cannot solve the world's problems alone. Yellow needs a community to really address all of these problems and to enact the systemic solutions that yellow came up with. And so that's ultimately what's going to push you into turquoise. Some yellow stats for you. About 1% of the adult global population is yellow. And yellow has about 5% of world influence through the media, through books, through government programs, and through think tanks and stuff like this. The style of government under yellow is systemic flow. It's knowledge-centered governance, the dawn of systems thinking within government, and rule by experts and intellectuals, which of course blue is going to be very opposed to, which is why whenever you see some intellectual who goes into government, what is the common demonization and critique that blue/orange might have of that? It's like, oh, he's the elite. They're the elites. Yes, they are the elites. They are the information elites. That's what yellow is, information elites. This is not a bad thing. This is actually what's necessary. But of course, blue-orange may not realize this, may demonize it. So how do you go about transcending yellow? Well, that's basically what I've been doing over the last couple of years, is trying to transcend yellow. The transcendence of yellow is going from self-actualization into self-transcendence. What a lot of people don't know about Abraham Maslow is that towards the end of his life, I mean, he developed that pyramid, right? You should be familiar with that. And in that pyramid of needs, the hierarchy of needs, there is the top cornerstone of the pyramid, the pinnacle, which is self-actualization. And that is like yellow. But then Maslow, in his later years, he actually had some self-transcendent experiences himself. He had some mystical experiences himself, and then he realized that there's another level beyond self-actualization, which is self-transcendence. So if you take that triangle and you sort of just intersect those lines and you carry them forward, extrapolate them forward, what you get is you sort of get this inverted triangle at the very top, like a light shining out from the pyramid. And that top part, that is the self-transcendence. That's when you have to release and let go of developing yourself and start to undo and deconstruct yourself. And this is a big radical transition from doing and thinking into the being level. It's accessing the absolute through direct consciousness. And that's what's going to move you beyond yellow. That's what yellow is really missing. To transcend yellow, you have to deeply realize that understanding and the mind will never bring you happiness. In fact, your happiness, in many ways, is directly or inversely proportional, rather, to how much you think. Transcending yellow really requires enlightenment, Kundalini awakening. Psychedelics are a great way to go beyond yellow, as they will give you mystical experiences and profound insights that shatter all of your models and all of your concepts and show you that the map really is not the territory. I can't tell you enough how important having a 5-MeO-DMT breakthrough would be for you if you're at yellow to transitioning you into turquoise. That 5-MeO-DMT breakthrough is going to show you the full glory of what turquoise is like. And what's so special about that is that you might not get to that level naturally, just through meditation or through contemplation for decades. So to be able to tap into it, if only just for 15 minutes, if only for 60 minutes, that will be enough. That will be enough for you to actually get a tangible taste of what turquoise is really about. And it's a huge shift. Like it's beyond a quantum leap. Other ways of doing that, if you don't have access to 5-MeO-DMT, is through Kriya Yoga, meditation, self-inquiry, Vipassana. All of these spiritual mystical practices are good. Solo meditation retreats, long periods of isolation are really helpful for going beyond yellow. Realizing the limits of concepts and the mind and beliefs. It's one thing for me to just say that. It's another thing for you to really grasp it very deeply, what the inherent limitations are there. To transcend yellow, you need to go beyond models into a deep embodiment of these things you've been reading about in the books, these things that I've been talking about in my videos. Be more emotional, be less logical. Yellow is still a little bit too left-brained. He needs to bring that back and merge it with the right brain again. Opening up the heart chakra is very important for transcending yellow. Loving kindness meditation can be a good technique for transcending yellow. Practicing more compassion. Yellow cares, but yellow still doesn't have that unconditional, deep, mystical love that only comes after ego death. Yellow still doesn't have that. To transcend yellow, be more human. Be even more intuitive than you've already been being. Surrender all control, like a deep surrender of control. Totally deconstruct your ego. Break it down so there's no ego left. Deconstruct your web of beliefs and your emotions. Deconstruct all your models and all your concepts. Deconstruct even further materialism and dualism. You need to get to the point where you have deconstructed reality so much that you actually do not believe in a physical external reality at all anymore. You don't believe in time. You don't believe in space. You don't believe in life or death. Like, these things become just fantasies for you. That's how much you need to deconstruct materialism. Most yellow people are still stuck in the materialist paradigm. This paradigm is very deep, and no matter how much I talk about it and how much you think you understand what I'm talking about, you are still stuck in the materialist paradigm. You still have all these assumptions, and fundamentally, you still believe in a tangible, physical, external reality, in brains, in neuroscience, in atoms and molecules, in the Big Bang. You still believe this stuff is real. And what you need to realize is that it's not real. It's just a hallucination. You're inside of a dream. And you will awaken from this dream, and you will realize that all of this stuff that you thought was real and tangible, that it has no substance to it whatsoever, no reality to it whatsoever. To help you transcend yellow, start to read a lot of books about non-duality. Start contemplating. There's lots of stuff to contemplate. See my episode called Contemplation, where I tell you how to contemplate and different topics to contemplate. You need to transcend language to transcend yellow. Start to notice the limitations of language. Mindfulness practice is really good. Mindfulness above and beyond just sitting down and meditating for 60 minutes, but mindfulness all the time. Mindfulness in the shower, mindfulness while you're brushing your teeth, mindfulness while you're eating, mindfulness while you're doing your work, and everything else. It can be really useful for you to transcend yellow to start to model saints and sages. Find those turquoise saints and sages. There are plenty of them still alive. You don't need to go to the history books. They're still alive today. Many of them are. You can find dozens, hundreds of them even. And, meet them face to face, ideally. Get their energy. Get the vibe off them. Get the love off them. Get the wisdom off of them. That stuff just radiates. They ooze that stuff if they're a really good saint or a really good sage. And start to model that. And start to incorporate that into your visions of who you're going to become. Because that's what you're aiming for. Melt into the now. You need to become very, very present to go beyond yellow. Also, heal your energetic system. You might have blocked chakras, energetic blockages, various emotional kinks and stuff, which are still left from tier 1 that you need to iron out to really go turquoise. Do enlightenment intensives. You can get Shaktipat, which is a transmission of energy from a sage or a saint. Join a spiritual network or a community. So now as yellow, you're probably a lone wolf and you do a lot of stuff by yourself, and maybe you think you're very effective doing it that way, but also think into the future. Think about what that is going to evolve into. That's something I definitely face because I like to be a lone wolf. I like to do a lot of stuff myself. But then also I see the limitations of that. And I see that if I want to really have the full impact that I could have with my life and my life purpose, then I need to start preparing myself for how to be better at navigating and dealing with people. Maybe creating a community or joining a spiritual community. Bonding with people, having compassion for people, being able to develop that sort of patience that is necessary for dealing with all the social issues. Because in a sense, it's a lot easier to just be a lone wolf. Then you're not dealing with that entire social domain. And in a sense, it's nice, but also in a sense, it's kind of limiting because then you're not growing. You're not developing yourself as a leader. Sure, you can develop yourself as a leader as a lone wolf. You can do a lot of stuff that will improve your leadership abilities. But to really test your leadership abilities, that will only happen when you're actually live in the field, bonding and relating to people and dealing with all their shenanigans and all their nonsense and all their ignorance and all their misunderstandings and all of that kind of messy stuff. And ultimately, to transcend yellow, you need to enter a state of no mind, where you can literally sit and not use your mind for long periods of time. That's sort of the ultimate end goal. Of course, you're not going to get there quite yet. It'll probably take you years, maybe decades to get there, but that's a goal you should kind of keep in mind and start working towards it with baby steps. All right, that's yellow basically for you in a lot of depth. Now, in conclusion, what I want to say is that if you're orange, then your ego will want to claim that you're yellow. Be careful about that. You're probably not. It's very easy to overestimate yourself on this spiral. Even if you think that you are yellow and you're pretty sure about it, remember that there's many degrees to yellow. And yeah, maybe you are yellow, but how solidly and deeply are you into it? And I already told you earlier what the metrics are for gauging that. So my suggestion to you is don't try to skip yellow to jump to turquoise, but rather go deeply into yellow. Really work on building your yellow foundation, work on your ability to jump between different perspectives, to be non-judgmental, to be neutral, to be aware of your self-biases and self-deceptions and so forth. Really learn the entire spiral. Go back and revisit tier 1 of the spiral and learn how to communicate with stage blue, with stage orange, with stage green, and even go back into those stages and ask yourself, what haven't I fully integrated? What haven't I fully mastered and embodied from those stages? And you might find that there's still some stuff that you're hung up on from stage blue. Maybe you're still moralizing because you had a stage blue upbringing. Or maybe you're still hooked on sex or on chasing money. That's a stage orange hang-up. Or maybe there's some stage green hang-ups in you where you're still participating in some of the excessive relativism or excessive breaking down of hierarchies, or maybe you're too compassionate, too emotional, too pacifistic, or whatever else like that. Really go beyond the stereotypes and try to understand all of the stages below you, because you're going to need to design systems as yellow for those stages, which means that you have to completely let go of any kind of negative emotions you have towards any of the stages. A deep understanding. And the only way to get that is to be able to really step inside the shoes of those people, to see the world from their perspective, to be able to empathize with why that person is stuck in that perspective and is unable to move up to the next level, and to understand that, oh, maybe if I tell him this thing in this way, that will help him to open his mind to the next level, and then the next level, and the next level, and then maybe he can become yellow. Be careful not to just directly try to teach yellow to blue people or to orange people, because oftentimes they won't get it. And I want to give you some warnings in the end here. Firstly, Don't make the mistake of thinking that yellow is infallible. Yellow can make mistakes. Yellow can subscribe to one bad perspective too much than he needs to, or than he should. Or yellow can make factual errors. All right, so yellow is not perfect. Also, understand that yellow doesn't mean that you can't hurt people. Yellow can still hurt people. In relationships, maybe yellow can be a little too callous, a little too cold-hearted, or when dealing with a community, yellow can misread their emotions or their feelings or whatever. That can still happen. Also, understand that just because you're yellow, it doesn't mean that your policies won't hurt people. Just because you understand spiral dynamics doesn't mean you can't come up with a bad public policy, a bad economic policy, a bad education policy, or something like that. You still can, and you probably, in fact, will. You have to be very careful. It takes experience, it takes know-how, and you're going to make mistakes. And yellow doesn't mean that you can't still have human frailties and weaknesses or addictions, for example. So one of the problems is that I might cite an example of someone yellow, and then someone in the audience says, oh, but Leo, but that person has an addiction. That person's addicted to alcohol. How can he be yellow? Well, there's nothing that says that yellow can't be addicted to alcohol. And there's nothing that says that yellow can't have a sex addiction or some other kind of addiction. Now, of course, it's less likely because tier 2 people tend to be a little bit above that stuff. They've tended to work that stuff out. Those very crude, gross addictions. You're probably not going to find a stage yellow heroin addict. Probably not. Because if you're at stage yellow, you don't need heroin. At this point, you're actually enjoying the beingness of life. You're enjoying the magnificence of existence to the point where you don't need hard drugs. But you can still succumb to many subtle addictions. Maybe you have a media addiction, cell phone addiction, porn addiction, whatever else, So make sure you don't over-idealize any particular stage. All right, the next stage is going to be turquoise, and that one's going to be really interesting because that's going to be the top of the spiral, at least for this series. All right, that's it. I'm done here. Please click that like button for me. Don't forget. That helps to improve the visibility of the videos. And come check out Actualized.org. That's my website. You will find special resources there, unique content that you can't find anywhere else. Check out my blog. Check out my book list. Check out the Life Purpose course. Check out the forum where you can discuss all this stuff. Speaking of which, I'm going to be creating a mega thread for yellow examples. We're going to have lots and lots of videos of yellow examples. So find that link down below, click on it, go to the forum, and you'll find it there. We also have mega threads already created for stage blue with tons of video examples, which are interesting and fascinating and funny and outrageous, and also for stage orange and also for stage green. So we'll do that for all the stages that we talk about. That's it. The last thing I want to tell you is this. The danger with me talking so much about spiral dynamics is you sort of just kind of fall into this hypnotic trance of just like, yes, Leo, yes, Leo, yes, Leo, just spoon feed me more wisdom, more golden nuggets. And that becomes a danger because you start to, first of all, you just blindly accept everything I say after a while. You stop really questioning it. And you blindly accept the entire spiral model. And then you just become this sort of spiral zombie. That's not the objective here. You need to start thinking for yourself. Think critically. Start applying this model for yourself in your own life, and you will see that it's difficult to apply. It's not always clear-cut. Sometimes you see a situation or a person or a book, and you're not sure how to classify it. Maybe you miscategorize it. And that's good, because as you go through that struggle, you start to learn the limitations of the model. And that's right. Spiral dynamics is just a model, and it has limitations, and it is not the territory. So start thinking for yourself. A stage yellow person doesn't just blindly read and believe models from other places, which is cool, but you got to actually think through it yourself. Realize the limitations. Maybe take this model and try to connect it with some other model that you discovered somewhere else. That's what you got to start doing. You got to start doing that with every single video that you watch from me. It's so easy for you to just fall into this trap of believing me. Beliefs are our enemy. Nothing within Actualized.org can be taken as an ideology or as a system of belief. That's going to limit you. That's going to be way too restrictive. You need to be able to be completely fluid with your mind so that you can jump between perspectives, between models. You can throw them out, throw them away, hold contradictory ones, have paradoxes in your mind, and be able to wrestle with all that and not be confused and not be lost. And you certainly can't take anything I say on faith, because it's not about what you believe or what kind of model you possess that is going to get you the results that you ultimately want in your life. It's your ability to think critically and independently for yourself. That's what it takes. So watch out for that trap, and I'll see you in the next one.